Of an introduction to who we are. If any of you folks don't know, the Yurok tribe is very far northern California, almost to the Oregon border, just the Talawadeni are neighbors to the north. If you're looking here, you can see this kind of orange boundary here. And that orange boundary is our reservation. So it's 1 mile on either side for 44 river miles. And the kind of larger red boundary is our ancestral territory. And so the reservation is only about 10% of the ancestral territory, but it's kind of where we have our strongest jurisdiction and where tribal law kind of holds sway. Now, that said, there we are kind of restricted to the reservation in that respect, but we never really ceded our traditional role as caretakers for all of ancestral territory. So kind of a theme throughout this is going to be the importance of partnerships and working together on things. And so I want to give props to Redwood National Park Service, as well as California State Parks, kind of joined together to form the Northern California Condor Restoration Program. And so the way that this got started for us is back in the day, actually 2003, our elders made the determination that it was time to bring condors home after 100 years absence. We had a panel of our elders called the Tribal Park Task Force who were specifically designated to prioritize natural and cultural restoration needs. And they chose Condor largely because of his deep cultural importance. You can see a beautiful painting of our world renewal ceremonies, which I'll talk about a little bit more, but Condor ties very closely to those world renewal ceremonies. This is an Audubon group, so I assume you're familiar with Condor, but just in case, of course, he's a giant obligate scavenger. He's actually the largest land-based bird in North America with a wingspan of 9 to 9.5 feet and weighing as much as 25 pounds. We say that his lifespan is 60 plus years. I think the oldest condor, California condor right now is 60. Might have hit 61, I'm not sure. But we say 60 plus because we're not actually sure how long they can live because we haven't been studying them long enough. We do know their near cousin, the Andean condor, can live as much as 80 years. And of course, being such a large soaring bird, they've got a really amazing flight capacity. They can fly anywhere from 100 to 200 miles in a day. Now, the reason, back to that world renewal ceremony, that they're so important to us as Yurok people is because they are integral to our jump dance and our white deerskin dance, which are our world renewal ceremonies. And we consider ourselves foundationally to be world renewal people who are responsible for doing our part for keeping the world in balance. And so Condor specifically, we believe in our kind of our origin stories, gave us the Condor song, which we sing in these high ceremonies. And we believe that he provides his feathers and through them his spirit to the dance. And so his spirit, we believe to be one of generosity and kindness. And I don't know if it's the right English word. Sometimes we say purity, and we say purity because he is a scavenger, and so he never kills anything. And so it's that, and a lot of times even our ceremonial leaders will become vegetarian because they don't want to introduce any of kind of that more chaotic death energy into things. I don't know if that's how to put it. But so we believe that he basically personifies living life. So that said, he is what we call Poitwason, or one of the highest of the animals. And in the words of one of our former council member and cultural leaders, Richard Myers, it can soar the highest, so we figured that was the one to get our prayers to heaven when we are asking for the world to be in balance. And in fact, they'll fly as much as 15,000 feet in the air. Different villages, different tribes for sure have different feelings about things, but in my own family, I was taught that they're never to be harmed, and any feathers that we receive are considered to be gifts. They're an interesting species in and of themselves in that they are monogamous. They form lifelong pair bonds. They have one egg every other year, which they'll incubate for 56 to 58 days, and which won't fledge for 6 to 7 months because it takes a long time to grow into their wingspan. They don't reach full maturity until 6 to 8 years. And all of this is important because it leads into or ties to their continued endangered status because they're experiencing high mortality with low natural reproduction. Probably a lot of you are familiar with their history, but they went through rapid decline in the probably late 19th and throughout the 20th century, such that by 1982, there was only 22 condors left in the world. In the 1800s, their range had been kind of this brown blob that you see here. But by 1950, they were reduced to just that red wishbone that you see kind of in central and southern California. And of course, most of those mortality factors were related to humans, as a lot of our problems seem to be, unfortunately. But it came with, particularly in California after the gold rush, with a major reduction in the megafauna that they relied on. One of the theories about why they persisted in Central and Southern California is because ranchers really took over. And so there was a new food source for them. There was direct human take in unsustainable levels, people collecting their eggs or the birds themselves. In our area in particular, there was habitat loss, like the loss of our traditional prairies and our old growth redwood that they relied on. Incidental poisoning, we say. It's when people would put out like strychnine for wolves or other carnivores, and then condors would incidentally eat them and die. And then still, they struggle with DDT contamination and lead toxicosis. I usually talk about DDT, but I, in the end, want to focus more on where we're at than the kind of history of it. But of course, we know that eggshell thinning is what the issue with DDT is, and they still do struggle with it in Central California. Um, but we did do an assessment, and our levels are about 4 times lower than theirs. So we're not to the breeding stage yet, but we're really looking forward to see if our eggs are viable. And I'll talk more about the lead issue a little bit more. But ultimately, of course, it got so bad that they captured all of the birds out of the wild with the hopes of starting a captive rearing program. And it was very controversial at the time, but ultimately successful, such that by the 1990s, they were re-releasing birds back into the wild. And as of our last count in December 2024, we'll get a new one this December, there was 566 total birds with 369 in the wild, much better than the 22 that they once got to. The biggest concern for condors, pretty much everywhere within their existing range, is lead contamination. Um, People who love condors know that the source of lead contamination is the use of lead ammunition. It's a very highly fragmentable metal, so that when it hits an animal, it will spread and break into hundreds of pieces, even very small bits of which can be toxic, not only to condors, but to other facultative scavengers like ravens or eagles, pretty much anybody who will scavenge on food. It's very toxic to all of them. But tied with that low reproductive rate, which a lot of these other birds don't have, has reduced in an overall decline in the population, causing about 50% of deaths where we know the cause of death for a condor. So the statistics say that if we can tackle the lead ammunition issue, which I think is totally feasible, both as a hunter myself and having worked with a lot of hunting communities and starting to expand into the ranching communities, we could probably at some point just stop managing condors, all other causes of mortality aside. So this is the big one. To kind of address that, we manage what we call the Hunters as Stewards project. And so that is a project that is specifically designed to reach out to the conservation ethic that so many hunters have, kind of in the mold of Teddy Roosevelt. Because these are the people who love to be out in the wild, who love to be out in nature and experiencing it in its full complexity, or one of the groups of people. And so we've had a lot of luck talking individually to hunters and talking to people that hunters listen to, saying, hey, we need to make this transition. And so I know, at least in our initial studies, when we were first reaching out about this in Northern California, depending on the event that we held, anywhere from 85 to 95% of the hunters that we talked to said, first at that point, because this is like 2010, that they did not know about the issue. And second, that now knowing it, they are going to stop using lead ammunition and switch to copper. So that was a really incredible thing. So we kind of took this partnership-based approach, because really hunters are going to be the solution throughout all of it, such that we were reaching out to the people we thought who might be most concerned about an endangered species coming in. And so really that was our industry leaders, and that was actually our utility companies. As some of you are maybe aware, power lines were a big problem for condors in some areas. And the good thing about the power lines is we were able to do a GIS assessment of kind of how condors would use the land, and then found that basically the power lines moved with them. So rather than crossing flyways, they were parallel to flyways, so that you wouldn't have that big concern of a bird accidentally hitting, a power line. So that was no big deal. Timber companies we thought might have the most concern. And so we actually started reaching out to one of our biggest partners, who's a Green Diamond Resource Timber Company up here, to say, hey, we want to do this thing. What do you think about it? Do you have any concerns? Kind of come in with an open hand, saying, hey, let's see if we can do this in a good way. And ultimately, because condors are who they are, um, they're pretty easy as endangered species go. Um, One of the concerns with the Endangered Species Act is that if you spook a bird, even, it's considered take. And so any sort of loud noises, trucks going by, machinery being used can cause take. And even if you get some sort of like permit for that, can be costly and difficult to deal with. But the cool thing about condors is being scavengers, they like chaos. They're really interested by it because where big noisy things are happening, or where there's fire happening in a more natural sense, or there's been a big storm event or something, that's where the dead things are. So they're not spooked by these things that would otherwise impact other threatened and endangered species. So talking to them, a lot of federal agencies, state agencies, nonprofits, conservation groups. Ultimately, what we came up with was a decision to release them as a non-essential experimental population in the Pacific Northwest. And so that's under the 10J rule of the ESA, and that basically allows you to custom craft regulation that focuses on and prioritizes what the condors in this case need, while loosening those things that maybe aren't actually as important to them from a conservation perspective. So, for example, spooking a condor out of a tree is not that big of a deal. Cutting down one of their nest sites is a very big deal. But so this map that you see here is kind of the condor's range, or the non-essential experimental population range. So it goes all the way up into Oregon, down to about Highway 20, and then a little bit into our neighboring state there as well. If a bird is to fly out of this range, they automatically get fully covered by the ESA again, just as with any of the other flocks. So it ended up being something like a 6-year process for us to actually get through the environmental assessment to get to this point. And we got thousands and thousands of comments, which was incredible because we got a lot of love through them. We also got a lot of just really good comments about how do we manage these things. Ultimately, in 2021, we were authorized to actually start our release program through a finding of no significant impact after we finished the environmental assessment. And so it was determined through this process that probably the best place to do this was in Redwood National Park. We'd gone through various kind of exercises to determine a release site. And so you need things like sufficient human access so that we can get there and actually manage and monitor the birds, but also limited human access. So not everybody can get there and manage the birds. You need something that has a lot of open spaces. You need some place that has some good drop-offs because the birds that we receive are juveniles from the breeding facilities and they're not always the best flyers. So you need kind of ideal flying conditions. They're big soaring birds, so they need a lot of wind. So places with good wind. It all came down to a location within Redwood National Park that shares boundaries with Yurok ancestral territory, and in a particular location that's also shared by other tribes in the area, like the Hupa tribe and Cholula tribes, and had been historically a really kind of culturally important place. Kind of bringing to the point that condors aren't just a Yurok thing. Certainly, we kind of led the charge on this, but we've had a lot of support from our neighboring tribes, and condor, for most of them, plays a role either in those world renewal ceremonies or in other healing ceremonies. So I've been glad to see them spread out across the landscape. But ultimately, what we ended up doing was building a release and management facility. And so you can kind of see the 3 parts to it here. The birds that we have are for the large part free flying. When they first come in, when we do health checks, to do observations, we do have this facility. And so the facility, that kind of big caged area that you see is the flight pen. And so if a bird is with us for whatever reason, that's where it'll spend the majority of its time. You can see behind it, there's kind of a couple buildings. They're actually converted shipping containers. And so that's our observation space. if we have birds in the facility, we can watch through one-way glass and kind of observe how they're doing, how their health is, what their behavior's like, how are they interacting with other birds, taking account of all those sort of things. And then off to the side, kind of where we're all standing, you can see this, what we call the double door trap. And so that's actually how we get birds in and out of the facility. So there's a door to the outside and there's a door to the inside, and you can open and close them remotely so that, say you put a carcass in there and you want a bird to come in, you can put the carcass in, it'll get drawn in, and then you can close the door, and then you can open it to the primary facility. And so if we're just trying to catch all the birds for our regular trap ups, which I'll talk about, you just let them in, or you can like selectively bring birds in that, hey, maybe this bird looks sick or injured and we want to catch them up. So we started breaking ground on that in, let's see, I think we got our authorization March 2021. Of course, that was right in the middle of COVID. So everything was out of stock, all the wood, all the steel. We couldn't really break ground until August, but we managed to build this facility. This is a picture actually of us building a predator fence. So we have a lot of large cats up there and we have a lot of bears. And so we have a 12-foot predator exclusion fence for the height. And then also it's got an electric fence around it to keep the bears out. And so we do see them come by regularly, but thankfully we haven't had any incidents. We were also able to get funding and support to revamp a Redwood National Park building, which is our primary offices as well. So they've just been an amazing partner. Other partners have included those like the Sequoia Park Zoo. It's an AZA rated zoo in Eureka, California. And so they have actually built a condor care facility. This is an example of the one I think at LA Zoo, but it was kind of the foundation for what we were trying to do here, which was have a place where birds could be held if they needed some sort of more prolonged treatment than we could provide them. So this is kind of a schematic of how that came out. You've got the two different cells. They could hold multiple birds if the birds are in a state that they can share space, they're big enough. Or if you need to isolate a bird for some reason, they're injured or they're just really not looking well and they shouldn't be picked on by other birds, you can isolate them as well. We had a really great partner in the Ventana Wildlife Society. Because things were taking so long to get off the ground, normally all the release sites, when they get new birds, they get them in the fall because it's kind of, I mean, it's disruptive to go in there and to catch birds. And so to catch the birds at the breeding facilities, which is where we get them from, you don't want to be there in like the springtime when they're actually doing their breeding and it's a sensitive time. So normally birds get captured and then transferred in the fall. We were not going to be done by the fall. But if we didn't catch these birds in this fall of 2021, that meant that we were not going to get condors until at least fall of 2022, which would put us behind by a whole another year. So Ventana Wildlife Society actually said, hey, send them to us. We will hold them. We will take care of them. We will watch over them until you are ready to receive them. And in fact, almost a year to the day, we actually received our first condors. And so I'm going to share a little bit of a video. This Yurok here, Preganish Nesquichat, means that condor has finally returned home. And the video worked earlier, so hopefully it works for you guys now. Does have I'm whispering in this because I need to be quiet while we're actually doing a live feed here. This was recorded, but it does have the text on the bottom.
I am currently sitting up at the Northern California Condor Restoration Program's Release and Management Facility, overlooking both our 4 juvenile birds, hopefully soon to be released. Apologies to anybody listening, but
oh, what happened? There we go.
our silence as much as we can, so I am speaking in a voiceless whisper. We don't actually want them to know that we're here. It's really important for the birds' health and wellness that they have as little exposure to humans as possible.
This is the handle that we'll have to push to trap them. And then we'll use the pulleys to open the outer doors. Release them. I'll just be watching from here.
The birds must voluntarily go into the double door birds identified that we would like to release. And so right now it's just a little bit of a waiting game to decide who's going to go in. Watching the stream or our commentary, you can see that we have captured 2 of the birds that we had targeted for capture. That includes bird A2 and bird A3. 2 males, type of numbers 1010 and 1045. So I'm going to step away for now, but keep tuned in. We should go pretty soon.
And so I honestly myself, I don't know if that was shared with you guys last time. I'm not sure if it was ready or not, but that was created by a guy named Matthew Falcon. He was actually a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service employee who just loved condors. I'd been introduced to him 2 weeks earlier by email saying, hey, if you ever need videography, I kind of do that as my side gig. I'm trying to get into that. Just let me know. And I'm like, oh, great, that's awesome. We'd had a strong partner who had planned to come out and do the videography for us, but COVID hit his family like a week beforehand, and I'm like, oh no, what are we gonna do? They were fine, so obviously I wouldn't care just about myself. They were fine, and so with like 2 days notice, I email Matthew and I'm like, hey, I know I never responded to your email. I'm sorry, we've been busy, but do you want to come video contours? And he basically, from what I can tell, finished out his shift and drove up. So just incredible props to him. But a little bit more about the players for that first release. We actually received this bird, Paitoquin, March 25th of 2022, so almost a year to the day that we got the first approvals to actually release condors. He is not a releasable bird, unfortunately. He was a bird that he had been intended for release, but he just got too tuned into humans at the breeding facility, and that just does not tend to go well for the birds. But he was going to be able to serve as a mentor bird, which I'll talk about a little bit more. He may never going to be released, but he was the first condor back in Yurok lands, and at this point over 130 years. So I have a real special place for him in my heart. Why are we not advancing? There we go. We received our next cohort, or our first cohort, just 3 days later on March 28th. And so all of our birds receive an alphanumeric tag so that we can identify them visually. You can see that on all these birds. And so this was A0 through A3. And all of these birds, you saw this release, they're kind of named or nicknamed for either their personality or the role that something spectacular or important that happened with their role with us. And so that first bird out was actually A3. And so we called him Poitwason, which means the one who goes out ahead. Literally, he was the first one out. But it's also a colloquial term that we use for our leaders, for our ceremonial leaders and our village leaders. And so our hope for this was that he would be a leader for condors. A2 went with him. His name means Nesquichok, which means he arrives or returns, referencing condor's return. Next out was A0, our first female, Negem Nichween Cash. She carries our prayers. And so that was in reference to the fact that condors, yes, carry our prayers in the world renewal ceremonies, but also the fact that there were so many people putting good energy and good prayers out there for her that she carried our prayers with her. The last bird to released was Fahalet, which means finally I fly or finally we fly. Kind of tongue-in-cheek. But the deeper meaning was that this first cohort finally was out and flying free. The tongue-in-cheek meaning was because he had a faulty transmitter and he had to wait 3 weeks later than everybody else before we could get a new one and get him fixed. So he's like, finally, I fly. That same year, we received a second cohort that's not standard, but because these birds have been held over till spring, we were able to bring in another cohort in the fall. And so A4 is Chirparsaninapek. I feel strong because he came out the gate and just went for one of the older birds trying to exert dominance. He kind of got his butt handed to him a little bit. He had learned some humility, but he feels strong. There was A5, whose name is Neen. He's a really quiet and reserved bird, but kind of one of those people that the other, or birds that the other birds seem to look up to and mind their P's and Q's around. So he's got a strong personality, but we called him the Watcher. Manelkwek, which means I'm shy. He was the most timid of our birds. And Hewachek, which means I'm healthy because she had the inauspicious honor of being our first bird who had treatment of some sort. She had a nodule of some sort on her bill, which turned out to be nothing, but she had to take a trip down to Oakland Zoo and everything. Ultimately, the goal of this is to release 4 to 6 birds every year. And so these birds are well socialized in advance. I think I saw somebody ask a question about where we get the birds from. They all come from the breeding facilities. There's one in Oregon Zoo, in Boise at the World Center for Birds of Prey, the LA Zoo and the San Diego Zoo. So we actually bring them all together as younglings before they come to us to kind of develop a cohort and partnerships and friendships. And then they come to us at about 1 to 3 years old. And so the reason for that age is because that's about when they would leave the nest. And so that's been found to be the best time to release them. So they stay with us for at least 4 weeks to kind of get acclimatized to the region and to be assessed to make sure that they're healthy and well and behaving well. And then, as reference, we bring in mentors from the zoo, like Paitoquin we did. And so each of our birds actually carries a transmitter or two, wing-mounted satellite transmitters. They allow us to kind of get an overall sense of where. I'm sorry, my dog's scratching at the door.
Well, can you let Weir in?
He will scratch until I let him in, so daughter's letting him in. So they each carry a satellite transmitter that kind of gives us an overall sense of what's going on with the birds, as well as a radio transmitter, which we use for on-the-ground tracking for the birds. And so the radio transmitter is how we get eyes on them and make sure they're healthy. And they give a mortality signal if there's a problem, which allows investigation if no movement has been detected for a specific time period. So maybe the bird is sick or injured or heaven forfend, it's died, we can go out and check it out. The birds are released through what's called a soft release. And so that's what you witnessed. They're ready for release when they're socialized and roosting well and are a good body condition. And then we release them either singly or in pairs into established feeding events so that they can just mix right into the external flock, which they've actually been getting to know in advance through their fence. We do 1 or 2 at a time so that we can really make sure that they are flying well before we release the next birds. The mentor bird himself plays a very important role in this. Even though Paitoquin couldn't be released himself, he kind of gave the finishing touches to teach these young birds how to be condors, to establish dominance hierarchies, and to focus their attention on adult-type behaviors, because he's great, other than the human influence that if he sees humans, he wants to be with humans. And he also acts as a social magnet to these birds, such that they can be brought back to the facility and reassessed as needed. Paitoquin now is living his best life in the Oakland Zoo. They have a nice facility there. He was removed after the threat from HPI became relevant here, highly pathogenic avian influenza. And so now we just use our own birds for mentors. So we conduct biannual trap-ups in the spring and the fall. And so these trap-ups allow for physical checks, transmitter and tag maintenance, and then also blood draws looking for potential lead contamination, and now highly pathogenic avian influenza. And we have most of our crew through the AmeriCorps program. So all of our young people, they come in on a seasonal basis for about 9 months, and they get some great hands-on experience working with condors. We'd really enjoyed learning about condors, learning their personalities. They are a very social sort of species. They definitely have their hierarchies and their pecking orders, but they also have a lot of relationships that they've been building. A2 and A3, for example, I'm not surprised that they ended up being our first two birds out because they were best buds from day one. And you'll see them in kind of cuddles like this, or we call them cuddle puddles sometime as well. One bird that's a particular favorite of mine is actually A1, who we referenced earlier, Let. I named him because of how he came into our flock. You know, he's kind of that last one of that cohort. But I kind of think that I should have called him Nasishanami, which means the silly one, because he is the silliest of our birds. He's always tugging at things, playing at things, tugging at other people's feathers and things like that. A3 and A2, and I think A0 all kind of took off immediately after they were released, but he just tromped his way out, and I love them, but they look like turkeys when they walk. They're kind of silly when they walk. Just watching them here. But let's see when he does this. The very first thing that he did is he went after this scale that you see here, and we use that as a tool for managing their health. And wow, this video is longer than I thought it was. That's an example of our pool we have there for water and for bathing. But he immediately starts jumping up and down like this. And every time a bird would come up and try and knock him off, he'd like play King in the Mountain. So he's just always been a fun bird to get to know. I think that the last time that someone came to talk to you guys, it was still fall of 2022. And so we went through one of the worst winters that, I mean, you guys probably remember it. All of California was completely socked with snow. We do not get snow in Crescent City where I'm from, and we had snow, so you know it's a bad year. Our birds weathered the storm just fine, probably a lot better than we did as humans. They were just fine. It was wonderful. So 2022, they stayed pretty close to home. It makes sense. There were not many there. They didn't have anybody to take their cues from, basically. But that was really our hope for that first cohort, was that they would start establishing it. And so you can see kind of an orange boundary here. That is their range at the end of 2023. They'd gone from about 53 miles away from the initial release site. And then by 2024, it's that red boundary. They'd made their way all the way down to Leggett and past, I think kind of Petrolia area. So they're getting down there. I don't have a 2025 map because they haven't really expanded out of here at that range. That was kind of a full stretch for them. But I'm quite sure that as they continue to grow our population and as they continue to expand, they'll make their home more and more down south. As we continue on, we do a biannual spring trap up I mentioned. And so that first spring trap up was in spring of 2023 was great. We had 8 condors at that point. They were all healthy. None were found to have lead levels of any concern. But that didn't last long, such that by the fall of 2023, we had our first lead contamination event. And so A6, or Manelquak, I'm shy, had a blood level of 61 micrograms per deciliter, and 35 is our treatment, our threshold for treatment. And so he actually had to receive the first chelation treatment in our new facility at the Sequoia Park Zoo. So that's the pictures of him there. But then he was able to be released. We did do a period of watching so he was released into the trap at first so we could watch him. One of the really good things with this is I mentioned he was our shyest bird. He then served as mentor bird for our next cohort, and I think it really gave him some confidence, and he ended up being a much more mature and assertive bird than he had been, so that was kind of cool. We since have had a couple other lead exposure events, A9 and A7 that you see here in 2024 and 2027. Unfortunately, we have a poaching problem in the area near our release area, and poachers do not use non-lead ammunition apparently, so we have to keep a regular eye on them. And unfortunately, this year we had our first mortality event. And so this is B7. He was our youngest bird, and he was our last released. He had actually only been free flying for 3 months when he was found dead in January of this year. So that's a very sad thing. I'll drop a video that I made about it in the chat when we're done here. So if anybody's more interested in his story and who he was, but we called him Pena Peyowak because he was so friendly. He seemed to get along with everybody, and so it was a real bummer. Um, we found him in a tangle of tree fall, and so as bad as it was, we were kind of hoping that it was a natural death because that at least feels, I don't know, it's going to happen, you know. But after a full autopsy, it was revealed that he had ingested an air gun, a lead air gun pellet, which is actually, some people know about the ban on the use of lead ammunition in California. Air gun pellets are not included in that because that law pertains only to things that use gunpowder as an accelerant. So don't know where he got it, but just this little tiny piece of lead was unfortunately enough to kill him. He had high liver levels and high bone levels, so we know that it got into his system, and then this was pulled from his gullet. So, a little bit more work to be done there, obviously. We'd primarily been focusing our work on the rifle work, but we often say that even the smallest decision can make a big impact. So that was kind of one of these occasions, unfortunately. But it is not at all bad news. We actually have 25 birds now. We've just finished releasing the last of that cohort. And we may have our first pairing. This is A1 and A0, our two oldest birds, Negem Nichwinka and Hlahalet. We do not know if they're a breeding pair, but this last spring they definitely, while staying social with folks, ended up spending a lot of time with each other and kind of moving around the landscape in a way that may indicate they were looking for a nest. Ultimately, we did not see any evidence of nesting, but I'm pretty hopeful that maybe next year they'll give it an attempt. They're just old enough now at 6 years old. Another thing, another really cool milestone that we've had, some of you may recall, we talked about how there was just 22 birds at the low points before they started doing their catching of them all. And we surpassed 22 birds just in our release area now. So that was pretty cool for us. This is bird C5, and I named her Rurwama, which means we sing, together we sing. Because the Yurok word for singing actually means that you kind of bubble up inside with like joy or feeling. And that's kind of how I felt when we released C5. So all of that to say, like I said, we've got 25 birds now. We've had some really just wonderful interactions with people who've come to visit us. Because of the partnership between the Yurok Tribe and Redwood National Park, we're able to weather some of the complexities. For example, the shutdown. We were not impacted by the shutdown, and so we were able to keep managing the birds. We've had times of financial difficulties, and so the parks has been able to step up extra. We've got tons of volunteers now. We're getting hooked into the universities to help kind of expand our research and things like that. We're going to start doing kind of youth tours, maybe probably not this next year, but maybe the year after that, so we can really get our young people integrated and meet the birds, which is kind of the whole goal of having condors back, is to get them reintegrated into the environment and into our cultural communities. And so things are looking pretty good for condors at this point in our range. We're very excited to see what the next few years to bring us. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and say Waklau, which is the deepest of thanks. If you want more information about condors or just about the work that we do in general, we do have a website, yuroktribe.org/wildlife. If you're a Facebook person, we do maintain a Facebook page. We're pretty busy, so we only update about once a month. But you can find us at that's an old site. It's not Yurok Condor Restoration Program anymore. It's now Northern California Condor Restoration Program. But the link is the same, facebook.com/Yurok Condors. And if you haven't seen it, we've got the Yurok Condor live feed. And so you can find the link there or write it down, but you can also just Google Yurok Condor Cam and we'll pop right up. So with that, I guess I will end. And again, with that, Waklau. And I guess see if we've got any questions in there, or if there's anything else that you want to cover while I'm sitting before you here.
Well, thanks a whole lot for all of that. This is a really exciting project, and to me, one of the cool things about it is the kind of mixing of the hard Western style science with the traditional style, traditional approach to these wild birds and the setting that they're in. And you've kind of pioneered that strategy here, and it seems so far at least to be working.
Does. It certainly gives you a lot of passion for the work. When I have more opportunity to talk, like I give 2 hour talks sometimes, one of the things I like to talk about is this concept of a cultural keystone species. And so biologists can, kind of resonate with the idea of an ecological keystone species, and there's different definitions, but it's a species that has an inordinate impact on the environment with it's in, whether it's due to its size or whatever. It's an inordinate impact. And I think, regardless of who you're talking to, I think Condor is a cultural keystone species, certainly because they drove us to do this, but they're just such a wonderful example of what we can do as conservationists. They're kind of this high point for the conservation community and kind of this guiding light for things to say, hey, we can really make things happen. So I think on a much broader scale, they kind of inform our role as conservationists, as restorationists. So kind of a cultural keystone species for everybody.
Yeah. So we do have a couple of questions coming in, and one is, how many condors are you hoping will inhabit this area ultimately? Do you have a long-term goal for that?
We don't necessarily have the long-term goal other than we're kind of going to reassess things at 20 years. Obviously, we're assessing as we go, but as an experimental population, that was kind of the boundary they wanted us to say what's happening. Um, we get the question a lot as to how many is enough. And ultimately, we're doing a whole bunch of population assessments. To me, I don't think it's so much a how many, but like how long. So I talked about this lead ammunition problem. Birds can live as much as 60 years or more, but the average lifespan for a condor is like 7 and a quarter or something
Mm,
like that because of the high level of mortality.
mm,
And so that's just long enough to maybe get in one breeding event. Obviously, that's pulled high by those birds that do survive and have been breeding for years and years. But really, it's going to be a matter of getting our choices in line with conservation. I think that's going to be the success more than any sort of number. But we're looking at 20 years. We'll be releasing 4 to 6 birds every year, with a caveat that we released 8 this year, which was a lot.
mm. Yeah, well, yeah, it'll be really exciting when you get them. Like the first ones are just now reaching breeding age, and then
Yeah,
monitoring that. Once you get a population that starts breeding on its own, then things really can take off.
that's going to be super exciting. I mean, if I'm just looking at these questions,
Yeah,
I answer the questions if we get our birds in the wild. We get them from the breeding facilities. We've gotten them from the Peregrine Funds in Boise, in the Oregon Zoo, and from the LA Zoo so far. But it's kind of every single bird is assessed for where it should go in the flock. And so it's kind of a hodgepodge from year to year as they decide which birds are going to go where. And that depends on genetics and gender distribution or sex distribution and things like that. If a facility had a particularly bad year, like there was the year that Ventana lost 9 of their birds to a fire, they got more birds that year, unfortunately, to rebuild themselves up. Um, as to the treatment for lead toxicosis, we are trained to give them chelation treatments. We also work with a team of veterinarians, volunteer vets up here in Humboldt County who help us with those treatments. And it's calcium ADTA, so similar to the ducks and the geese as you referenced there. Let's see here. All right, so how do we capture the birds for our checkups? I'm not sure when that came in, but it's through that double door trap. And so we just put a carcass in there and leave the door open. And oh my gosh, this is not the norm, but this last time for this fall checkup, which by the way was totally clean, I forgot to mention that, no lead toxicosis, so that was great. We had 10 birds all of a sudden scramble in to go after that carcass. So 10 of our 25 birds in that relatively small area. You got to be careful when you close the door because you don't want to accidentally get someone trapped in there. But our lead field biologist, Trevor Benz, he actually just joined us in May, was able to do it. And then you just open the door in that double door trap. You just open the door to the facility and and they work their way in. They stay at the site regularly because we always provide food for them. They are doing wild foraging, but this makes sure that they have a clean food resource. A lot of our foods come from our organic dairies or roadkill that's been x-rayed to make sure it doesn't have lead in it. But also just kind of keeps the area tuned into their kind of search pattern for food. So they're back regularly and they make use of the facility regularly. So at any given point, you could go to that condor cam and see condors flying, which is pretty cool. Let's see. What do condors do during prolonged rainy weather? They just hunker down. They can go as much as a month without eating if they had to. That's out of stretch, but like 2 weeks is no big deal. So as soon as they get a break, they can come back, particularly to our site, and we've got food for them, or if they've got another foraging site that they like. But that's how they're kind of built. They're built to tank up and then just be able to hold out until the next good feeding happens. Okay, what do their nests look like? They are cavity nesters. So they don't actually form their own nests. They will find that's actually why redwoods were so important to them up in this region. And actually, one of the Talawa words for them is he sits in the big trees, referencing the redwoods. So they will nest in redwood cavities from like a fire that's burned them out or something like that, and maybe it regrew at the top or something to that respect. Or they will nest in pothole caves. And we have seen a full range of different types of nests. There's a funny one in Ventana where it's big enough to fit the condors, but like one of the things that they do to get ready to fledge is they'll like practice flying, get their muscles built up. This place is so small that the chicks that fledge out of it and they fledge very successfully do one wing and then they turn and they do the other wing. So they're a very adaptable sort of bird, very smart. Um, and I think the last question I see with any concerns with them eating dead whales, and if I've missed any questions, please just pop up and let me know. It depends on the whale. The baleen whale, so I mentioned briefly that we did an assessment of DDT in our area. And our levels were overall lower. And as you go farther north, it gets lower and lower. We found that the baleen whales were pretty much non-existent. They had no real issue, and that kind of makes sense because we're relatively clean up here. And so they don't have a lot of, and they eat really low on the food chain, so there's not a lot of bioaccumulation. But the things like the orcas who eat higher up on the chain we were finding having higher DDT levels. So we did, I think, 4 or 5 years of study where we basically collected samples from every marine mammal we could get our hands on. We only had like 3 individuals who had high DDT levels, I think. So I'm not too concerned about them eating dead whales. Sometimes California sea lions, unfortunately, because they're not a favorite amongst our fishermen up here. And so you will not uncommonly find a sea lion that has been shot. And so we did have them checking out a seal. I can't remember if it was a seal or a sea lion, but I think it was a seal. And they did find lead in it. So we had to actually remove that animal from the wild and bury it. So that's kind of our bigger concern there.
Yeah. Do you have outreach going to the fishing community to try to do something about that? Because we have a similar issue down here, I think. The fishermen
Yeah.
and sea lions not getting along very well.
We don't. And it's a little bit complicated. I myself, so I grew up fishing too, and I didn't particularly care for California sea lions in my net. I did use rocks to drive them off. You would not hit them, but you'd splash near them, and then they would, at least ignore you for a little bit. Except for the one time we skipped a rock and accidentally hit one in the head, which I felt so bad about. And I shouldn't laugh, but he kept popping up various places around our nest and looking at us like, "What the heck did you do that for?" I'm like, "I'm sorry, dude. I didn't mean to actually hit you." People feel pretty strongly about them. We've done some talks about the problems with lead. We've done talks about respect for the animal's life, the actual sea lion and stuff. It's the same individuals who are doing it, time and time again. They're not going to really be convinced. So
Yeah.
right now we don't have a solution other than just being on top of it when sea lions are found dead.
Yeah.
I see the question of how much does a condor eat at a sitting?
Yeah, I was
I
curious about
don't
that
know,
too.
actually. That's a good question. Somebody probably knows that. And in fact, probably Chris West, who's our lead condor manager, might know it because we feed condors when we have to give them chelation treatment. So he weighs it all out and things like that. Basically, we just look to see, A, we've got people observing them all the time to make sure everybody's eating regularly. If they have not come down to eat, we're like, okay, let's go check them out. But we'll just look at that crop to see if it's nice and full, to see if they've had a good meal.
Hmm. My guess is they can probably eat a prodigious amount at a time because,
Probably a
as
good
you
amount.
pointed out, they can go a long period without eating, and
Hmm.
most of these large, long-lived animals are adapted to just gorge when they can.
Yeah, I
It
kind of wish I
strikes me when
was.
you were talking about their life history and all of that, they are exactly analogous in almost every way to albatrosses out at
Mm,
sea. Very
in a lot of
long-lived,
ways.
very slow reproduction. Uh,
Hmm.
they look like they probably have very, very low energy flight, so they can cover tremendous distances without expending a lot of energy.
I have not seen a study done on California condor, but and some of you may have seen it. There's a really cool thing done down in the Andean condors where they put um, a sensor on a condor and he flew 100 miles without flapping his wings once using
Right.
those Andean winds and stuff. So they're really impressive.
Yeah, and as you pointed out earlier, you've got those coastal winds as well coming up over the ridges, so these birds
Mhm.
undoubtedly make use of that.
Yep. You see, Anna asked if there's a way to view the condors in flight. I mean, you probably they're not so much down where you guys are right now. We do have a couple of viewing sites up here. A particular one they seem to like is Dolison Prairie along Bald Hills Road if you're ever up this way. They just like to rocket up that Redwood Creek and they go out to Hoopah Country and into the back country through that. So Bald Hills Road, Dolison Prairie seems to be one of the most common places to see them. Nice thing about working with condors is they're a lazy bird because they need to wait for those high winds. So we usually say maybe set up camp around 10 o'clock and uh, and see if you can't see them flying by.
Cool.
Looks like it might be it.
Well, thanks a lot. This was a great, great presentation and just an absolutely fantastic project. How
I
lucky do you
appreciate
feel
that.
being able to do this kind of work? This is, really internationally groundbreaking work.
I appreciate the blessings that I've been giving. Um, I had not actually planned to go into wildlife work. I thought I was going to be a doctor. Got to be a senior in college and realized I didn't want to be a doctor and got kind of picked up by this program. And so it's been the last 18 years of my life. So I'm pretty lucky, I think.
Well, great project and a great presentation. Much appreciated.
Thank you all very much. And again, thanks for the invitation. I'm sorry I couldn't join you in person this time. But I'm sure we'll be back in a couple, 3 years to give you another presentation if you'd like.
You bet. And feel free to come down for a visit anytime. Get in touch
It'll be fun.
and I cannot wait until we can see one of your birds down here on our coast.
I'm excited for that day. You all have a good night.
All right, thanks everybody for watching. It was fun.